This is the process shot. I'm Michael. I'm limited to one of two timelines apparently, and it's the one where I've seen Look Both Ways, a new romantic comedy drama from director Wanuri Kahiu. It follows Natalie, a college senior who has an impulsive hookup with a close friend just before graduation, which leads to worries of pregnancy at a party a few days later. Taking an at-home test, the story diverges into two stories, looking at the next 5 years of Natalie's life, in which a positive test sees her moving in with her parents to raise the child with the help of the accidental father, while a negative test follows her to Los Angeles as she works towards getting her dream job in animation and finding happiness and love through her art. It might seem like one of these stories is more eventful than the other, but don't worry. They both have the same amount of simplicity and formula in their writing, and very little, if anything, that challenges your expectations for the characters or the two stories' events. Both versions of Natalie are effectively unrelated outside of the central gimmick and the fact that they're the same person. And so the film is almost literally two different stories in one package, with minor details that interconnect them throughout, and beginnings and endings that do closely match. It's actually a disappointment that this is the case because the film has a pretty explicit setup, which does suggest a more visual, dare I say cinematic means of showcasing the differences in events. Though this goes out the window minutes later when Natalie moves to Los Angeles while Natalie moves back home. Anything after that is more for the sake of setting the timeline rather than illustrating or expanding on the trajectory of her life in those different ways. And again, it really just makes it feel like two different stories being told at the same time. Odds are that if you cut out each separate story scenes, rearranged them, and played the two side by side, they would both probably sync up with a similar pacing and definitely an identical plot structure. Speaking of identical, there isn't too much done on a technical level to separate the timelines either. There are some lighting choices early on that do help, with a brighter and sunny Los Angeles compared to a slightly colder or bluer life back home. But after this initial setup, things become slightly normalized. The film's editing does work well enough to keep the non-linear presentation from becoming too confusing after this, switching back and forth after being sure to share enough information to make each scene worthwhile. On a visual level, there isn't much of a difference between the two lives, as they both maintain a relatively flat and otherwise unimpressive look in their cinematography, rather than anything more appropriate for the settings or the story tones, which are also something that would have made things more interesting if there were more divergence. Instead, the movie plays it safe in pretty much every aspect, sticking to genre conventions and expectations rather than experimenting with its narrative or the presentation. The end result is entirely watchable and entirely predictable, and feels more like a really weak double feature than the character study it could have been. I mean, as much of a character study as a rom-com can be. I'm just saying things could have been better. Look Both Ways. Wanuri Kahiu, 2022. 2 stars. I wouldn't recommend watching it, unless you want a good example of missed potential. That's it for this review. If you liked it, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews. I would think that my other timeline is the one where I'm not making YouTube videos in a movie theater, but with my luck, it's something completely mundane, like wearing a different shirt when I left the house one day.